Hello and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview. This is a show where we take a look at the current edition of the North Coast Journal. My name is Ruby Cayenne, and we are joined, as usual, by North Coast Journal's news editor Thad Greenson and arts and features editor Jennifer Fumiko Cahill. Welcome, guys.
How you doing?
Ruby, how you doing?
I'm doing very well. How are you guys?
Doing well.
Good.
Muddling through.
Yes. Well, as always, we have a really exciting edition this week, and we're going to start out by Thad. Would you please tell us what's on the cover this week of the North Coast Journal?
Yeah, this week we have a story by Alex Service, who is the curator at the Depot Museum down in Ferndale. Down in Fortuna, and a local historian. Have a story that she's been working on for quite some time for us, and it's looking into kind of the experience of Japanese residents in Humboldt County during the 70 years, or almost 70 years, when the county had the Chinese exclusion law on the books. And so she just was really curious to kind of look into what this experience was like for folks who were not explicitly named in the demographic of people that were that were excluded from being in Humboldt County, but were no doubt impacted. And so she's spent the better part of a few months, I think now, going through old editions of the Humboldt Times and the Humboldt Standard, and just kind of compiling as much research as she could through the Humboldt County Historical Society and the Clark Museum and other entities, of trying to get kind of firsthand accounts of what it was like to be Japanese in Humboldt during that time period.
That's really kudos to her for doing that, putting that tremendous amount of effort into something that is really important and doesn't get talked about a lot.
Yeah, we're really grateful for her for first pitching the story and then putting in the work. And I think it's a really important slice of Humboldt County history to keep digesting and memorializing, making sure it's not forgotten.
As a Japanese American living in Humboldt, it's something that crosses my mind. And, throughout Asian American history, or the history of Asians living in America, it's been this kind of volley between, during the Chinese exclusion, the growing number of Japanese needing to clarify that they're not Chinese, right? Or that employers needing to clarify that, no, they're not Chinese. And then when World War II comes and internment comes, businesses that are run by Chinese Americans have signs up that say, "We are not Japanese." People are wearing pins that say, "We are not Japanese." And there's a real play between, this lumping together of Asian Americans into one big sort of monolith in terms of the eyes of the law, et cetera, and the eyes of government, and the individuation of different ethnicities, sometimes just for convenience and for, cheap labor and capitalism. It's a fascinating read that Alex put together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, I think you hit the nail on the head kind of at the end, is that, so much of this depends on capitalism and is fueled by a sense of economic insecurity. I'm not going to say that that's the root of it at all. But what was fascinating to me about reading, Alex's research is that it's clear that for periods, and especially early in this exclusion era, that it was seemingly anyway, totally publicly acceptable to have domestic workers who are Japanese. And there's a host of want ads placed in local newspapers in the classified section from either Japanese folks looking for work in a domestic capacity, cooking or cleaning, and also from folks looking to hire a Japanese worker to work in their home. And this seems to have gone on for years without kind of any controversy. it's only really when you see an expansion into different roles, or at least in a fear that Japanese residents would expand into different roles, that that really the nasty racism that underlies all of this is really becomes really overt. So Alex tracked on a story um, of a internationally renowned seismologist who came over to the United States from Japan after the 1906 earthquake to research. And part of that was assessing doing damage assessments in various areas, and so that work brought him up to Ferndale, or to Humboldt County, to see Ferndale, which was decimated in the 1906 quake. And he's out sightseeing on his first day here, and is punched in the face by seemingly by a bigot who was afraid that he was a non-unionized worker who had come to take a union job here, basically. And then similarly. A handful of years later, I think it's in 1909, two Japanese brothers come to Eureka to open up a shop where they're going to sell different goods, but some Japanese wares. And it's kind of only seemingly, and according to the historic record that we can find, it's only when there's somebody setting down roots in a business district that then again this really nasty violent racism rears its head, and their storefront was bombed, and threatening letters were sent to their realtor, and their lease was pulled, and eventually they leave the county. And that was actually seems to, based on the very thin record we have, seems to have had a real enduring chilling effect. That then lasted for 30 or 40 years, when the U.S. Census shows that there were no Japanese residents in Humboldt County. And I think it's somewhat ironic, right, that the Chinese Exclusion Act was on the books for 70 years here and was never actually successful in excluding or expelling all Chinese people from Humboldt County. Census records, are consistent that there were always Chinese residents here. Yet the county was successful through terrorism, essentially, in excluding Japanese people for 4 decades, which is not an insignificant amount of time by any stretch.
Yeah, it's certainly not lost on me. I work, 3 blocks from there.
Mm-hmm.
We basically at the Journal are in the triangulation between where the seismologist got punched, where they put up the gallows for the purge of the Chinese, and where the store got firebombed.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's another thing I just always, whenever we talk about this era, this really shameful era in Humboldt County's history, that I feel like it's just so important to reemphasize, is that this wasn't a blip, right? This was a county policy for almost 70 years. I think it was for 68 years. A, and then B, it only ended less than 70 years ago. I mean, it was only repealed in 1958. So this is very recent history, the end of this exclusion era in Humboldt County. And I think we all, need to remember that and think about that.
Yeah, that point that you just brought up, that about how so many of these wildly bigoted and racist things that were going on for lots of different ethnic groups, but talking here about Japanese people, like you're saying, was existing up till a really recent time. And it's so important to remember that, because we're not just this perfect society where all of that is gone. And I think that cultural differentiation is not only important for individuals who identify in different cultural and ethnic ways, but also for other people who don't identify as this or that, but just need to have that understanding of where any people are coming from, and what that means to have gone through that, and what that means to exist now in today's age, and to be aware. Yeah.
It's one of the things that I think has been really impressive to me, seeing the Eureka Chinatown project, and seeing Happy and Humboldt Asian Pacific Islanders in solidarity, that they've put these events together, like Chinatown commemoration and the Obon Festival, and really asserted, a cultural presence in a place that, historically has tried to legally exclude them, or, by terrorism exclude us. And so it's really wonderful to see the effort that people are taking to kind of reclaim this history and reclaim Humboldt County as a space where we belong. It's been wonderful to see, especially in the wake of the pandemic, when, anti-Asian violence peaked again. And certainly hasn't left us yet.
Absolutely. And just to your point, Jen, I would say that I also just want to add that it was really important to Alex Service that we published the story in the month of August, in the same month that Obon took place, to say kind of as we're celebrating and as we're welcoming and staking out, restaking claims to this place, that there is a remembrance and a looking back on what brought us to this point in time.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, such an important topic that we're talking about, and both of you brought up so many salient points, and so I thank you both for that. And I just want to ask you, Thad, if you have any final thoughts about this story.
Just that I'm really grateful for Alex Service for bringing it to us. And, without people like Alex, who take it upon themselves to, for, I'm sad to say, very little pay, research something and really kind of bring this history forward for us, so much of this stuff would be lost. And so I'm just really thankful to Alex and to all of our local historians who kind of make this their life's work of making sure we do not forget these stories.
Absolutely. A huge shout out to them. Well, thank you so much for that story, Thad, and I suggest with the utmost importance that people pick up the journal and read the complete story. If you live here, this is the history of this county, and so I definitely think that it's important, well, not just if you live here, but to know about these things. So thank you to both of you for that. And on a similar note, we have some more news-related things. We have a story that's about some things going on with the Ferndale police. So, Thad, you want to key us in on that?
Yeah, I think obviously I'm sure most readers, listeners, viewers have followed what the devastating fire in Lahaina from a couple weeks ago. I think for anybody who has been to Maui and visited that space, the images are just kind of unimaginably devastating. I know they were for me watching as in real time as the fire was happening. So this week I got the chance to talk to Faraz Sultari, who is a Ferndale Reserve police officer. He has this really unique role in Humboldt County where he doesn't live here. He's never lived here. But for 12 years now, he has been a seasonal reserve officer in Ferndale. And so every year when the fair goes on in Ferndale, Ferndale needs lots of police help. And typically, it's a I don't know, town 1,200 or something like that. So it has a few officers and a few reserve officers at one time. But, for every day for the fair, thousands of people are coming to town, and sometimes it gets a little rowdy, so they need kind of more of a police presence, both to police the rest of the town and to police the fair. And so I think it was in 2011, Faraz had been working down in Citrus Heights and had made this decision to move to Lahaina with his family, and he'd worked with Brett Smith, the previous Ferndale police chief, before, and was kind of lamenting that he was giving up his role as a reserve police officer in Citrus Heights, and he wasn't going to be able to do that type of work anymore. And then Chief Smith said, well, I've got this role that if you want to come back to California for, just a couple weeks a year, you can keep your police officer certification, you can work fair for a couple weeks. And so that's what he's been doing for the last 12 years. Unfortunately, Faraz lost his home, lost his business, and lost a rental property that his family owned in Lahaina. And obviously this happened right before he was supposed to come back and work the fair. And so I got the chance to catch up with him and just talk to him kind of about his experience policing in Ferndale, why this was a role he wanted to hold on to, and then really get kind of his firsthand account, not just as a Lahaina resident, but also somebody with kind of a background in public safety of what it was like escaping the blaze in Lahaina. And he was first of all very fortunate that his wife and 3 kids were not on the island when the fire broke out. They were actually visiting here in California. But he was there alone, finishing a job for work before he came out and met them. And it was just, for me, it was really compelling to just hear from somebody who had been there, both about kind of the terror of seeing this fire encroach so quickly and really having to, he got out of his house with just his car keys, his checkbook, his police ID, and some cash. He didn't have time to, for instance, go to the safe to get his wife's wedding ring, or go track down the laptop that had their family photos on it. So just hearing his account of getting out was really compelling. But then just hearing his perspective on how a town that, or a city, an island that is really like one of the chief tourist destinations in the world, could have been so ill prepared for a devastating event like this. And hearing him while processing kind of the loss and the trauma of what he'd been through, also hearing him kind of process the anger that Maui wasn't better prepared for this, and he feels like there was some real lapses in on behalf of the public safety agencies. And he kind of talked about his experience was he'd been kind of monitoring the smoke from the fire that was a handful of blocks away from his house. But he said, they'd had fires there before and they'd always been put out. And he was just convinced that in a, relatively urban area like that if there was a real risk, that the fire department would be issuing evacuation orders, there'd be text alerts, the police would be coming through with PA systems telling people to get out, and none of that happened. And he's just kind of mystified that it didn't. It was just a really, at once sad and heartbreaking story of a family that has really lost everything, but also just a really, I think, compelling look at some of the issues on the ground in Lahaina that made that fire so devastating, so deadly.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, the lapse in the assistance from public safety is a point of anguish that I've heard from a few people that I've spoken to, and I know that is really devastating, and it also causes a huge feeling of distrust when you're unsure if your community, if the people who are supposedly keeping your community safe and keeping, are in charge of your community, are gonna be there to do that job and to make sure that people are okay. And as the people know who've kept up with this fire, it has been the fifth most devastating fire that has happened in, I think, the last 100 years, if not longer, in terms of the amount of human deaths. So I'm strucken by the loss, and I thankfully didn't have anyone that I lost, so I can't imagine, the way that some people are feeling.
Mm-hmm. Well, that was another thing that really struck me from what he said is, he was saying Lahaina is a small, tight-knit community. It's not unlike communities in Humboldt County in that regard, and that instead of 6 degrees of separation, you're working at like 2 or 3, and so everybody has been touched by this disaster, not just materially as far as losing homes and businesses and stuff, but is very close to the loss of life or the people who are still missing and unaccounted for.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that is really incredible that you were able to get such a firsthand recounting of someone who experienced it in that way. And I think that hearing those firsthand accounts can help people to feel a deeper sense of empathy if they weren't already able to kind of grasp the tremendous nature of the situation. And just to hear those, I think that helps to connect, people and bring community together when something so terrible and devastating has happened.
Yeah, thank you.
Let's turn over to Jennifer for what's happening in the arts and features beat.
Yeah, shift gears. So the fair is here, and I don't know how this happened, man. First of all, I have always been curious about how things like pies and jams and whatnot are judged at a county fair. And so I always kind of in the back of my mind thought, I got to get down there one of these days and just like spy on it, right? And so this was the year I was going to do it. And then when I got down there, somehow, you know how these things happen. No, you don't know. I don't know how this happened, but I was like, am I supposed to be eating? And a minute later, I was sitting down at a table and judging this thing with 5 other people. Pardon me, 4 other people. And one of them was a journal colleague who had already been established as a judge. And it was a vast array of contestants. The night that I ended up going, I always thought I wanted to write about the pie, but in fact, I went to the general baked goods night, which covered things like yeast breads, quick breads, muffins, biscuits, cookies, etc., and then everything from the junior contestants. So there was something like 77 adults who entered in different categories. And of course, there were no shows, but there were around 70 that showed up. And then another 70 some odd from the juniors. It was a lot of sugar.
Yeah.
And it was a really fascinating process. Like, I've judged oysters before and other things, but this was really challenging, partly because of how the judging is done. So, and this is like very standard kind of county fair stuff, where you are judging an item against itself. So, for example, if you have, like, a lemon bar, you are judging it not against like which of these lemon bars is the best lemon bar, but you are scoring it according to different criteria, like its appearance, its texture, the aroma and flavor, and things like that. Kind of the overall success of as Mary Berry would say, the big. But what's crazy is that sometimes you're comparing a frosted layer cake to another frosted layer cake, but it might be like a chocolate cake versus a carrot cake, or it might be, the variation can be wild. And the variation between the best of the best and the, I'm going to say, newest of the folks who should definitely try again was also vast. And I think what I came away with is that more people should enter. It was really something. I mean, granted, do I want to sit down and eat, 170 pieces of cake? I don't know. I don't know if I have it in me. But it was a very cool evening in that it was like a glimpse at a community, right? At what people love, what people feel proud of. It was an interesting back and forth between some very different judges, all people who love food, but from very different walks of life, different family backgrounds, different like ethnicities, and different. It was a fairly diverse panel, and people who were also varying levels of skill at baking, all big appreciators, not all bakers. And it was cool to see how, even if as we have these strict things, like the frosting has to be a 1/4 inch thick between layers. There were rules. But at the same time, there were differences, of course, in opinion, right? It can't be completely scientific judging. There's taste, there's opinion. And at one point that I wrote about in the story, my colleague and I disagreed about a lemon bar because I felt that the bottom was too thick, like too much cookie at the bottom. And for her, that was how her grandma made them. So that's the lemon bar she imprinted on as a little baby duck. And so that's the one she loves. And there were lots of things like that. And it was an interesting kind of moment of county character. We all got pretty sugar high. As I wrote in the story, I missed my exit driving home. Didn't feel right the next day, but it was really cool. And it was neat to see all the things that the kids had made. Like, these kids out here can bake. It was amazing. But it turns out that entering the county fair with your awesome jam recipe, cake recipe, or whatever is easier than you think. And you should definitely look into it if you are a proud baker. It's like $2 to enter, and there's some guidelines and whatnot, but I believe in you, Humboldt.
Hey everybody, this is Matt Knight. I am the producer of North Coast Journal Preview. I'm going to jump in here and just say a word of thanks to Ruby for hosting this show for the summertime. Ruby is an extremely busy person. She's got facing a senior year at Cal Poly Humboldt. She's going to be editing a Lenador up there. She is a Access Humboldt intern, and she also does a lot of other things. But I just wanted to give her my thanks for jumping in when Dave Frank left, and for being here for the summer to do this show. She is a remarkable young woman who we will hear from in the future. And I just wanted to take a minute to just give my thanks to her for hosting this show.
Absolutely. I want to echo that, Ruby. Thank you.
Second that, Ruby.
Thank you so much.
And I'll let you do your rap now.
Thank you so much for saying that, Matt. It's been a pleasure working with all three of you. I've been very happy to be here, and getting to know you guys has been great. So thank you all so much. And in regard to that extravaganza of sweets, thank you so much for sharing that story, Jennifer. I bet there's so many more.
Next year, Ruby.
Huh?
Enter next year. I know you got a recipe.
Yeah, maybe I never have. So there's a first for everything, right? Well, thank you so much again. And we ran out of time really quickly today. There's so many stories in this issue that we really needed to go deep into because they were just so important. And because of that, that's how it went. So that's about all the time we have for this week. But the current edition of the North Coast Journal is on newsstands now, and you should very much go pick up a copy. Support your local newspaper and hear about the things that are happening locally. It helps build as a community and helps you to stay informed. You can also find it 24/7 at northcoastjournal.com. That and Jennifer, thank you so much.